This is Everything is Spooky in the Dark, the podcast for WanderingCrystal.com.
So today's special guest is Rosie, a University of Maryland. Oh, I didn't write student. Let me just start again. You're just a University of Maryland.
Well, I work for the University of Maryland too, so I guess we go both
Oh, you're
ways.
not a student?
I am a student, so I'm a grad student and I work for the university. I am just all University of Maryland.
Oh, no kidding. Okay,
yeah,
well,
yeah, I'm all in it.
a University of Maryland student who did a cemetery internship. Are you still doing a cemetery internship?
So the internship did technically end, but we're still waiting for the internship partially was connected to Google, and so we're still launching parts of it. So the official internship has ended.
Oh, okay. But you do kind of know your stuff because of the internship.
Yeah, hopefully.
You can find her on TikTok by following Ghostly Archives. And I just have to say that I love your TikTok because they're interesting, historical, and hilarious. So if you like jokes, you should definitely follow her TikTok. You wrote an article called The 5 Things You Never Knew About Cemeteries, and I love that you said that cemeteries are kind of like open-air museums in a way, because I never thought about it that way, and it's so true. It's like the perfect way to describe cemeteries and graveyards.
Oh my gosh, yeah. We follow each other on TikTok, and it's just like the world is opened as far as like the things you can learn about your local history just by walking through a cemetery. Like, it's incredible. I mean, obviously there's the memorials, and like you can learn a lot about sculpture and different even architects and landscape architects. But then yeah, like you literally can walk, like what I love is just like walking down a row, and like to your left is some famous person from this era, and then to your right is some famous person from another era, and they never would have like connected other than through the cemetery. It's so cool.
Oh yeah. I do wish that cemeteries had information, like more information or easier to access information though, because sometimes
Absolutely.
there was this one grave in Edinburgh at Greyfriars Kirkyard, and for months I was like, who does this belong to? Because they're all really old, so a lot of stuff is just wiped away. And when I finally found it, it was like the best day ever. I was like telling my friends, and they didn't really care. I was just so excited.
Like, this is a big deal.
Yeah, like this is George Fowlis. And I'm like, okay. But it's so exciting.
That's such a typical taphophile problem of just being like, because I do feel like, so my master's program it's library science is the larger arc, but my specifics is in archives and curation, and it's exactly that. Like, you have to be a detective, and you're going through and you're trying to put records together. And so my internship, I was the digital archives intern for Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., and truly, that is exactly it. Of like, you can walk through and you're like, I don't know who anyone is, I don't have context, I just have names. And obviously, Find a Grave does do a fair bit. Like, you can look them up online and it's crowdsourced. But the cemeteries these days are trying to get a little bit more digital, just to like give access to this information. Like, there's incredible stories. Greyfriars Kirkyard is such a great example because like it feels like every person there has the most fascinating story. And so how do you get that out to the public? And so what we did is we partnered with Google to launch a Google Arts and Culture. Just so you can like walk through and like you can connect it to a map, and you can connect to your smartphone, and you can be like, oh my gosh, this person is buried here, and like they have this wild story. And it's all storytelling, really.
So is this just for Maryland, or are they planning on doing that for all cemeteries in the U.S. or over around the world?
Totally, yeah. I mean, it's funny, like, hopefully someday, I think like cemeteries in the death industry, you might say, I think from what I've heard and what I understand, a little bit slower to get online. Like, even a lot of funeral homes weren't really on websites until like the late 2000s. And I guess every area has its own version of that, and some of them were probably like innovators and on it early on in the days. But I think nowadays a lot of historical sites are looking to, how do we offer this? What's the accessibility of this? Like, how do we get this information online? How do we get records online? How do we have like exhibits so people can like connect with it a lot easier? And obviously, like, information is important for like historical purposes, genealogy purposes. But for cemeteries in particular, it's really important because like a lot of them are at risk. Like, Scotland might be a lot better situated for preserving old cemeteries, but in the U.S., there's a lot of cemeteries that are like being bulldozed, or a mall gets put on top of them, or a highway goes over them. And so the more like a community feels connected to it, the more it's likely to be protected. And so yeah, digital sources. Oh my gosh, yeah, it's it's a whole thing. It's like I feel like we're barely scratched the surface as far as getting cemeteries online.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. And yeah, I've seen like, well, particularly on TikTok, I've seen
Mm,
TikToks of like cemeteries. There's like five graves in the parking lot of a mall,
yeah.
and it's just crazy to think how many like people are actually buried underneath the mall or highways, like you said. I do like the fact that people, when they are more connected to it, they do want to save the history. So that's so
Mm.
important.
Yeah, completely. It's awesome. Like I mentioning TikTok, even a girl. So um, you and I were connected to this October Graves TikTok. I guess creating of different stories from around the world at different cemeteries, and it was this interesting thing of like seeing all of these. Like one person was in Savannah, and she talked about how like, oh, this building is on top of a cemetery, and this other building is on top of a cemetery, and like we're literally. I mean, like history is old, and we're walking down streets, and for all you know, you're walking on top of someone's grave.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in a place like Savannah, where so many places are built directly on top of graveyards. And then I don't know if the reason that they're built on top of graveyards is the reason that these buildings in Savannah are haunted, or if there's just a different kind of connection. But yeah, you could be walking over millions of people wherever you are in the US or all over the
Yeah,
world.
totally.
Even when you're in like a graveyard, like I keep using graveyards as an example, but there's
Mm,
so many people buried underneath it that it's like a hill now rather than being flat ground, but there's very few cemetery markers, so you don't know who you're actually walking
whoa.
over.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. Now, do you think like because Edinburgh itself, it's like such an old city. Like, do you feel like to get into the haunting side of things? Do you feel like that makes a place more likely to be? I don't know actually how you even feel about like, oh, like there's a lot of bodies here, so it's more likely to have ghosts, or it's more likely to have stories, or do you think the two are disconnected?
Um, do I think they're connected? I do think like the older a place is, the more likely there'll be like haunted history and ghost stories and
Mm, mm, mm.
definitely like I used to work at the zoo in Edinburgh, and my
Cool.
supervisor, yeah, it was a great job. My supervisor had her flat was 300 years old, and she was certain that there was a man, a ghost, living in her flat.
Oh my
And I was
God.
like, oh, it's because it's 300 years old. So, but yeah, it was like, anytime it's old, I'm
That's
like, ghosts.
probably goes. Yeah, I mean, over time, you just collected bodies. That's so funny. And it does make a lot, like, I guess because, like, the US isn't that old compared to, like, other parts of the world or even, like, just, like, industrialized world. And so, like, it's funny to think about, like, how we do collect ghost stories. I think from an archives perspective, I'm really interested in that. Like, I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, not a lot of ghost stories. And Tacoma Park's kind of oldish compared to like some of the DC neighborhoods. And yeah, I was almost surprised of like, well, like what are these areas that do collect ghost stories and like, are there records of this or is it all oral storytelling? Like, what's the folklore behind it? So I guess it makes sense. Yeah, 300-year-old flat. Of course, it would have a ghost.
Yeah, that is actually one thing I really like about the States versus like Canada, or I mean, Scotland has a lot of haunted history, but the States, even though it's like what, 400 years old, there's still so much haunted history in specific areas. And
Yeah.
some places really embraced it, like New Orleans,
Yeah.
Savannah, even well, Salem. It took them a while to embrace like their witch history, but
Yeah.
they have the ghost history there as well. And it's just, I don't know, that's something I
Totally.
really like about the US is
Oh
just everyone
yeah.
seems to really love their haunted history instead of being
Oh
like,
yeah.
no,
People
they're not
love
haunted.
ghosts.
They do.
It's so true. It's funny because I think obviously like there's the like industry behind it. Like people, I think like for people like my dad gives ghost tours in Old Town Alexandria, Virginia, which is one of the older areas in the States. And actually my mom now gives them too. And there's like, I think like for people, like history can feel very inaccessible, or like it's just dates and names and like presidents and congressmen, and you're just like, I don't care. But if you
Yeah.
have like, I think ghost stories are a way to like connect to that history. Like I can go to a building and they'll be like, J. Edgar Hoover stayed here. And I'm like, I don't care. And then they're like, J. Edgar Hoover's ghost stayed here. And he stayed here because he was dealing with like a lover and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, now I'm interested. Like, it's almost like gossipy.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it too, because it's like history can be so boring, but when you add like this
Mm-hmm.
like spooky aspect to it, or even
Yes,
hidden aspect, it just draws people to it, and it's great.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, that's really cool about your dad being a ghost tour guide, and now your mom. Do they
Mm.
work? Is there just the one ghost tour company in Alexandria, or are there multiple
Now,
ghost tours?
that's a great question. So the DC area, like Washington DC, is pretty tiny. It's like they say the DC metropolitan area because it's Virginia, like Northern Virginia, and then parts of Maryland are just kind of like offshoots of DC itself, just because it's smaller. And so when it comes to ghost tours, like there's the main, it's called like, I think it's like Alexandria Ghost Tours is the company they work for. But honestly, there's so many, like people, like you said, people love ghosts. And
Yeah.
so they have like a main one, and it's like a walking, it's like, I would say probably one of the more like affordable walking tours. They just get big groups of people and they just separate them out with all their tour guides. They wear little old timey outfits. So they have like, my parents pulled out their outfits like when I was in school in Northern Virginia, and so we had like Colonial Day where we dressed up in these like pilgrim outfits. So my parents brought those out of the closet, and that's what they wear on their tours, and they have little lanterns. But then also there's like pub crawls, and Washington D.C. has like the free by foot people have some really cool ghost tours. So ghost tours are happening honestly year round. But I would say that the tour company that my parents work for is probably one of the larger ones, just
Okay.
because they fit a lot of bodies in just to get people running through the different ghost stories.
So how did they get into being ghost tour guides? Because that's the coolest job ever.
Oh my god, I so well. So they're like government, like retired government. My dad in particular like loved history, went to the government, and it was fine. He did his time there, and then so in retirement, it's like literally my siblings and I keep talking. This is the perfect job for him. My family's always loved Halloween. They've loved storytelling and like spooky stories, and it's just been this like amazing like blend of all of that. Like my dad gives probably the cheesiest ghost story ever. Like just tons of dad puns on it, and like maybe that, like on my TikTok, I do, I do ghosty like bad, really terrible dad puns, and I guess I get it from him. I didn't realize that until I took his ghost tour actually 2 weeks ago, and he just did so many awful. He did like a Bloody Mary pun, and I just face palmed the whole time. We inherit that. So yeah, like basically like to become a ghost tour guide, which I highly recommend. You're outside, especially during like quarantine times. It's nice to have like a fresh air activity, learn about your history, learn the spooky history of where you're living. And yeah, you have to like learn all the facts, but then of course you learn like the more like oral tradition, like stories, spooky stories that have been passed down over the years. And so yeah, it's super super rad. I'm obsessed that my parents got into this.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like the coolest. Like, what does your dad do? Oh, he's a ghost tour guide.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, definitely a brag at parties.
I also like the fact that you didn't realize that your ghost puns came from
Yeah,
him until you went on his tour.
I know. Well, it's so funny. So like I started this TikTok actually over the summer. So again in library science is like the main thing, and I have to take a lot of computer science classes, and I took an art of influencer class, and it was all about social networks. And we had this big computer science professor who she's an influencer herself. She has like several accounts that she runs, and so it was all about like how to master algorithms and create content. And so we had to create an account from scratch, and so that's why I even created this TikTok. We had to create a fresh account, and I had just gotten my internship at the cemetery, and I was like, I mean, this might be an interesting way to like interact with the content. And there's just like a lot of content out there. There's a lot of like cemetery, ghosty places to explore. And since for this class, I literally had to post every single day throughout the summer. One day I was like, oh, I didn't have time to get to the cemetery this week. I need something. I'll just do a really bad Halloween pun that for some reason I know because my dad tells these all the time. And then it took off. And so I was like, I guess I'll keep doing it.
It works. It works.
Yeah, totally.
It's funny. So is that what sort of drew you initially to graveyards, like the history or visiting famous graves? Or is it because you did take this, like what drew you to taking the cemetery internship?
Well, so cemeteries in general, I think I've always enjoyed going to them. I find them very peaceful places. Beforehand, I do still do a lot of urban exploring. I love going to abandoned places. And I listened to a podcast recently, Atlas Obscura. I'm obsessed with Atlas Obscura. Like they have like these like crowdsourced maps that you can, wherever you are in the world, you can open up Atlas and say like what's near me, and you just find like the more interesting sites, like not necessarily the TripAdvisor type places. And a lot of Atlas sites in different cities, like they're just the unusual places to go visit or cemeteries. So I think because of that, I always liked going to them. And there's this like I feel very present in them. Maybe because there is that like spooky element, so your like fear senses are slightly heightened. And so I like them for that reason. And so when I was looking for an internship, because part of my program I had to have a field study and actually be working with archives and records. Congressional had an like several years ago had this position open, and so I found like an old blog post about it. And so when I reached out to them, and then we did the interview and whatnot, and I got to work with their main archivist. Talking to my friends, everyone was like, "This makes perfect sense. Like, of course you would be working in a cemetery." And I feel like the more I like, especially studying it from like an academic perspective, the more I learn about just general cemeteries, the more interesting it gets. Like, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface in actually learning about cemeteries. There's so much to explore.
That's so cool. I do remember seeing one TikTok where you showed the archive section of one of the cemeteries you're at, and it's like, there's so much information back here.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah, the record keeping is incredible. And so they have, like, Congressional has this old archives room that's like temperature controlled. It's like, I guess you could say technically, because Congressional is one of the oldest cemeteries in DC, and therefore, like, in the country, like, it's just, their records are incredible. They've had past presidents, they've had first ladies, they've had congressmen, like, and then also just like run of the mill interesting people who over the years have been interred there. And so a lot of records go there. They have obituaries. So their archivist does a really just cool job of keeping track of all these cemetery records.
I have a question, just it's not really related to ghosts or cemeteries, but because you live so close to DC, have you been to the White House?
Oh, yes, of course. I've not been inside the White House, though. It's definitely on my bucket list. It's like the joke in DC. I mean, maybe this is the joke everywhere. Like you only go to the big sites when friends come to town, and they're like, we got to go to the Washington Monument. So I've been to the White House, like the Lafayette Square. Actually, you can take a ghost tour of just that square. There's a lot of spooky history. The White House apparently has a bunch of ghosts. The number one thing I want to do in the White House, though, is they have a bowling alley. And it's invite only. Like you have to know someone who has access to the bowling alley, and then you can go to the bowling alley. And that's like the number one DC bucket list thing that I have.
You can just start like stalking people that work there, and
yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's not untrue.
That's cool. I think only American citizens are allowed in the White House, at least currently.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I know, it's kind of disappointing. My friend went down there and he wasn't allowed in. I think he found out before he went down there, but
he came to DC just to, that sucks. Yeah. It is really bizarre. I don't know. I would say probably, is it worth it? And there's so much other cool history. So if you do come to DC and you aren't allowed to go into the White House, I'd say right in that area, like definitely you can take like a Lafayette Square ghost tour. I would highly recommend that. Nearby is also what some would say is the most haunted building in DC is the Octagon House. And actually, again, through this TikTok thing, realizing that there are Octagon houses all across America, maybe other places as well, of these like 8-cornered houses that are just these like kind of architectural anomalies. And a lot of people think because of the weird shape of the house, it traps the ghost or something. I don't know why, but yeah, they have like, and so like there's all these urban legends about the Octagon House. Like some even think that the Octagon House, because it's very close to the White House, that there's a secret tunnel between the two. Just yeah, a lot of really spooky stories. So you can also do a ghost tour of the Octagon House too.
Cool. Yeah, I had never heard of this Octagon House.
It's
Oh,
yeah, it's a very wild place. They actually do like ghost debunking tours too. It's like a ghost busting tour, and they
oh,
go
that's
through
so
and they're like, this
cool.
is the famous story, and then here's what we think like why this story came about. Which is yeah, like I mean like their spookiest story I think is they um have a well in the basement, which is terrifying. Like just to think of like you go down to your basement and there's like very The Ring
Yeah.
so, and it's like boarded up too. It's not like an open gaping well. But they think that downstairs in this basement, there's just the story has come up over the years that they think someone was buried in like either they were murdered and put in the walls or buried alive down in this basement. And then like every time apparently the Octagon House does a restoration of the house itself, people always ask like, oh, did you find any skeletons? Like the story has persisted over the years. And so one of their historians who takes people on these ghost busting tours always like goes, we never found a skeleton, like just to remind everyone, like we don't know where the story keeps coming from. But it's persisted just because I think it's such a fascinating idea of like, was someone buried here?
Yeah. Oh, I like it when stories just sort of like appear out of nowhere and then
Yeah.
people just keep running with them. And then it
Yes.
almost creates like its own like little myth of its own. It's like,
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah, the folklore vibe. I mean, like,
yeah.
I feel like where you are, especially, like, just so many stories that who knows, especially like for us, it's again, DC is not that old comparably, but in like Edinburgh, like, like, what are you going to check the 1600s? Like, how do you go back far
Yeah.
enough
Yeah,
to
exactly.
verify?
So do you have any favorite cemetery facts, or favorite tombstones
Oh my gosh.
or anything? Because one of the things I really loved, I keep going back to your TikTok. If you're not following her on TikTok, go follow her. But
Oh,
you
thank you.
said there's a prohibition fact about Zinkies where you would store alcohol in these grave um, monuments because I guess they're hollow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you go around, and again, I'm not sure if this is like North American or if other places did this. At one point, you could basically mail order a gravestone, and they were cheaper. They were made out of zinc, and you can probably, if you just go to your local cemetery for, especially people in North America, they're pretty common. Like I know in DC, almost every cemetery has at least one. They're kind of like this bluish hue. They were cheaper, and that was why it wasn't stone or anything like that. So because of that, they were kind of all over the place, especially I think during certain wars when certain materials were harder to find. And so yeah, they're hollow. You can like kind of knock. I wouldn't touch them, but like in theory, you could knock on them and they have a hollow sound. And so during Prohibition, at least in Washington D.C., some of the cemeteries were in maybe rougher condition. Maybe it's places of certain crimes and things like that. And so because the a part of the panel was hollow, you could open it up. You could just unscrew the zinc tombstone, and people would leave money, and then they would trade it for alcohol. So like they would go back and forth, and these activities were happening at the Zinkers. And so again, not everyone, and as people have commented on TikTok and make a great point, maybe don't go to your local zinc tombstone and like start trying to open it up or find anything. Like leave it be.
Yeah.
But it is a very fun fact just while you're driving through these cemeteries to notice that and know that they had multiple purposes in the past.
Yeah.
For other fun facts about, I mean, like, gosh, I still think that the Zinker is just like such a cool, interesting thing.
It
If you
is.
do come to DC, DC has a lot. Like, DC is obviously known for like politics and government, and to me personally, like the more boring side of things. But there's a lot of weird history here too. Like, so Congressional Cemetery alone, like, it's just there's like so much like life and activity. They have prohibition tours where they actually open up a speakeasy and like have a band and stuff in the cemetery. They do movie nights. They do yoga clubs. It's called I think uh, Yoga Mortis or something like that. Or like corpse pose. Like they have like the names changed over the years. You can do yoga in the cemetery. They have a bee, like an apiary, and so you can actually get cemetery honey when they I guess harvest that. So it's like literally honey made on top of gravestones, just this beautiful like circle of life kind of thing. But for
Yeah.
gravestones themselves, if you go to Rock Creek Cemetery, which is in North BC, I think one of just the most interesting, there's a lot of weird graves there. Like they have Evelyn Davis, who is one of my favorite gravestones in BC. She literally has 3 gravestones. She just died recently, but she put her graves back in like the 90s. And one of them is her resume, like her actual, like her CV is on a gravestone of like where she worked. Her second one is all of her ex-husbands. And it's literally just like, he died, he died, he died. Like she like lists them all out like an old dating profile. And then the third one, which is where like her actual like tomb is, it just says Queen of the Corporate Jungle. Like this lady's fabulous.
I like that. I need to visit her grave. I remember seeing a TikTok
Yeah.
that you made about her. I
Yes.
could never put my resume. I don't even
Right?
like having my resume on LinkedIn. I can
Right?
imagine having it
Yeah,
on a tombstone
exactly.
forever.
It's so permanent, but it is like an interesting point of like how do you want to be remembered? Like I've been seeing just like like I just today I'm going to Baltimore and there's someone who invented the Ouija board, like, or I should say patented the Ouija board, and so their tombstone is a Ouija board, and so like
Oh,
it is just interesting to think about like what do you want to be remembered by? Because for a lot of people this is your final like marker to the world of like who you were and what it says about you. And I think
yeah.
that's becoming more the case. Like, I don't know, like Crystal, do you have thoughts of like what your tombstone would be?
Actually, I was inspired. I have not made this TikTok yet, but I was inspired with one of the
Ooh,
TikToks you made about what symbolism you want on your gravestone.
yes.
And I was like, wow, this is such a good idea. But I was thinking, I just really like, there's no way I'd be able to get this because, I don't think they really make these anymore. But like the really old 1600s grave monuments that they have in Edinburgh are just like
Oh my
so
gosh,
beautiful.
yes.
But
Oh, that would be stunning. Yes.
probably cost like $1
A
million.
lot of money. Yeah. Yeah, gravestones, I mean, again, there's a whole industry about it. I've even had the similar thoughts of like, because I would love to be buried in congressional, just because like, there's just so much life happening around you in so many ways that you're being memorialized. But man, it's some money. Gravestones are expensive. And so I
They
guess you should
are.
start saving up now.
So yeah, so you'd want to be buried in a graveyard that you know is going to be around and has like a lot of
Mm,
stuff happening around it.
absolutely. Yeah, like if there's tours, if there's like family events, like so today is John Philip Sousa's birthday, and so Congressional is doing like they have a marching band coming in, and they're laying a wreath at his. He's the guy who put the Stars and Stripes, and so like it feels like every day there's like an event happening. They have weddings there, like literally, there's so much happening. So I would definitely, I think I'd want to be buried there. I keep debating about what I would want on my like final tombstone. Obviously, like who doesn't want a mausoleum? They're just beautiful.
Yeah.
But so yeah, just thinking of I don't know, like but okay, so another cemetery or another gravestone that I really really like in DC is the Adams Memorial, which is Clover Adams, who is related to Henry Adams, and there's just a lot of urban legends around this particular, probably one of the more talked about grave sites in Washington D.C. So she was memorializing for Clover Adams, who unfortunately killed herself, and it's just it's a life size shrouded woman. Like she's like I don't know, like if she were to stand up, she would probably like be like 5'6" or 5'7". Like it's pretty big. And she's just sitting there and like these like staring eyes. And because I think like there's been a lot of unusual activity and just weird things, like people's like creepy things. I don't know, stories over the years around this. They've hidden it. And so if you go to Rock Creek Cemetery to look for her, you actually have to go in between these bushes. They like literally have her like hidden behind these bushes, so it feels a little claustrophobic while you're looking at her. And there's actually a replica of her called Black Aggie, and they've actually moved this replica of Clover around. First, she was in Baltimore, and then a lot of strange activities were happening around her, like cults, and I've heard human sacrifices, and I've
Oh
heard
my God.
just like really strange stuff, or even just like people who were like, oh, we want to do something kind of crazy, like let's go to Black Aggie to do it. So then they eventually moved it back into DC, and then now I think it's near Dolly Madison's house, so not super far from the White House. And again, just like really strange. There's like these certain sites that I'm always like, why this one? But it does look kind of a creepy. It's a creepy statue. Um, and so I'm like, do I want that? Because you're definitely going to get visited a lot
Yeah.
for a final resting spot.
So do you think they kind of hid the original one because they didn't want people coming and doing like weird things, or I
I
wonder
think
why
so.
they hid her?
I agree. No, I feel like I did the talking about like cemetery tours. There was a cemetery running tour that I did, and you could run from these like three popular cemeteries around DC. It was like a five. It was like a 5K basically, and it took us a long time to find it. Like it is really buried, and so the tour guide on that particular tour thought it was purposeful. I mean, I've never been anywhere before where it's like literally like she is behind like 7 foot tall bushes. Like you cannot see her unless you know that she is there. And if you honestly go to the cemetery itself, it'll probably take a little wandering. She's pretty much right in the middle of Rock Creek Cemetery, and so I definitely think it's that. I think like again maybe it's the fascination with death, or the fascination with her death, or again even people thinking that like it looks like she might just stand up. And I think honestly like the more like fascination and speculation goes around her, the creepier and more mystical it almost gets.
Yeah,
But again, highly recommend if you're ever in Washington D.C. to go visit her if you
I
can find
will.
her.
Yeah. Have you ever visited in Ohio? They have, I think it's called Hasselrock Angel.
Ooh,
And
no,
it,
what's that?
oh, you should look it up on Atlas Obscura. It's like this huge angel sculpture, and it looks like it has like tears running down its face, sort of. It's
Oh,
just from aging and stuff, but oh, it's so beautiful.
oh wow.
I can't remember
Is
who
it
the
eerie?
founding. Sorry?
Is it like creepy, or is it scary, or is it more like of a peaceful?
Mm, it kind of looks a little creepy, but like in a beautiful way, if you know
Oh,
what I mean.
I love that.
Like it's
Totally,
really
yeah.
good for people that love to take photos in cemeteries and stuff. Definitely look
Oh,
it up on
absolutely.
Atlas Obscura. But
Yeah,
yeah.
that's so cool. So would you say that are you like do you tend to like tour cemeteries, or like part of like what is it? They have like a word for it, like graveyard tourists or something like that. Would you say
Yeah.
that, or you're in that crowd?
Yeah, I would say so.
Oh,
But I
that's
do have very
wonderful.
specific places that I'll go to and take photos of. Like, I will
Oh,
not take a
interesting.
photo of a grave that is newer. Like, it has to be people
Mm.
can't be like affected by it. 100 years and older is what I like sort of go towards, even if I'm talking about like true
Mm.
crime. Like I don't mind
Mm,
talking about like Burke
interesting.
and Hare, they're serial killers from the 1800s, or Jack the Ripper, or
Mm,
recently did a podcast about Lizzie Borden, just because they're over 100 years
so
old. But
good.
anything like newer, I just feel like it's fine for some people, I guess, to talk about, but for me, I just can't. I just can't talk about anything that's too new. So same
Oh
with
yeah,
cemeteries. Like
absolutely.
I prefer like the older cemeteries that are no longer in use to just historic cemeteries now, but there are still a lot of beautiful cemetery monuments in newer cemeteries, but I usually won't take photos of those. But that's just like a personal thing.
Totally. It feels
Yeah.
very respectful. And you never know, like people, there's so much of like a taboo, especially in US cemeteries. I feels like, I don't know, again, if Scotland has embraced it more, and I definitely feel like other parts of the world have embraced death culture a lot more wholesomely. And I think that's
Hmm.
starting to change slowly. I mean, I feel like an awareness started to change, even just seeing how popular cemeteries are on social media. But definitely like if a family member is still uncomfortable, or if it was like in congressional, there's like a children's corner. And honestly, it actually is old. It's from the last pandemic, so I guess now about 100 years. But it does have like this there's certain like almost sensitivities about it, of like, does this person want their loved one um being, it's not sensationalized, but like uh being their stories being put out there, if like their story is still very like sensitive or raw or anything like that. So I totally
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah. Like there's definitely a way to be respectful, but I
Mm,
find that it's harder when it could like directly, like say your child died and then you see like somebody making like a video on YouTube about their
yes,
death. It's just like, not for me. But
absolutely. You're like, there's so many stories to tell. I'll focus on those ones first.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, there is a way to do it where it's respectful and totally fine, but yeah, I don't know. Just I guess the comfort level isn't there for me particularly.
Totally, yeah. Do you have, because the episodes on the Lizzie Borden, Birkenhair, all of those, gosh, they made me just want to travel so badly to go visit them. Do you feel
Yeah.
like have any of them, like, do you get like feelings when you go to these places? This is something that I've been questioning about myself a lot. I'm like, is it the cemetery itself, or is it like the place? Like, or do they all kind of just feel like, oh, this is just an interesting historic place? Or do you like feel like, yeah, something weird happened here?
That's a good question. Some places, like I haven't felt anything. Like there's in Greyfriars Kirkyard, there's a few haunted areas in it. I've never felt anything.
Mm.
I've never scratched or anything, but I've been on tours where people have fainted or they've
What?
like felt so sick. Yeah, there's one tour we
What?
went to in the vaults in Edinburgh, and a girl had to leave because she was like
Ooh.
so sick and she had fallen on the ground. And
Oh my God.
yeah, so it definitely affects people differently. I think maybe it just depends on your sensitivities, but
Mm, mm.
there are places I visited where I felt like I've been there before, even though I hadn't been there. But that's
Whoa,
not really like a
interesting.
spooky thing. But yeah, like New
Oh,
Orleans,
but
for
that's
example,
interesting.
I'd never been there,
Oh,
and I was like trying to find places, and it was just like so easy to find. And usually I'm very like directionally challenged. But yeah, I was like,
interesting.
this place is right here. Let's go down this place. And I was like, I was there before. I was like, ooh,
What?
yeah,
Wait, that is fascinating. I love
yeah.
that.
So
Just
who
your
knows?
soul, past life, who knows? Yeah. New Orleans does. It's like for all the people go like, oh, this ghosts aren't real or whatever. Like, and I still personally, I have no preference on however people if ghosts are real or not. But it is funny how like people places have presences, and man, New Orleans has a presence. It's so hard to describe it, but like I don't know, like you just go into a place and everything like I feel maybe it's like the right word is like sensitive. Like I feel very like aware and like the smells are different and everything feels more vibrant. And I have no idea why.
So do you
Tons of other cities have that, but who knows?
have you ever felt or okay, so before you visit a place and you feel this way, do you know the history of that place, or do you go there and you feel like different and you're more sensitive to it and then you find out the history afterwards? Or do you think you go in there and you know the history so you're kind of like more in tune with, extra noises, or if you see something, like what do you think? Have like which one have you experienced?
Totally, yeah. I definitely think like I love looking up a weird history of a place, especially like urban exploring alone. Like in Maryland, there's and Virginia, there's a lot of abandoned schools and hospitals, and I think because of that, like I love looking up the history, like what happened, why is it abandoned? Obviously, like I have to do it just to like find these locations, and so. But not every place I'll get a vibe at. Like I've gone to, I think at this point now, 6 or 7 abandoned hospitals, and not all of them. I mean, some like visibly it's creepy outside, but not all of them I feel a strong presence at. There's one as a mental institute that's closed down in Southern Virginia that I went to last winter. That I knew a little bit of the history of it, and I looked up more of it later. But it had a vibe. I don't know how to describe this place. It's the Day Jarnett Sanitarium, and um, horrible things happened there. And I knew a little bit of it when I was walking around, and I actually didn't even go that far into the building just because I was like, I do not feel good here. Like when you talk about like
Oh,
that girl who felt sick on the tour, like, and I wouldn't say like I think I'm a very imaginative person more than sensitive person. Like my imagination was like, what the heck happened here? This place feels wrong. And then afterwards, learning up of like they just if you name like a human crime, like terrible things that happened to a person in the hospital, it happened at this place. I mean, and sometimes they were the first ones. They did obviously all the lobotomies. They did just like it's like hard to just like it's just a lot of like bodily pain to people who were staying there, and you could like almost feel it. But then also you learn the history, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe my imagination was also like kind of playing with this area. It just felt wrong. And I've been in
oh,
other like Glendale, which is another famous abandoned hospital in Maryland, tuberculosis hospital. Lots of bad stuff happened there, but I didn't really feel anything more than just like, wow, this place is creepy. It's like this falling apart hospital. So if that makes
oh.
sense, I don't know.
Yeah, it does. That's interesting too. Just the fact that you like felt the energy was like heavier in that one place.
Yeah, happiness. Yeah, that's a really good to describe it. Yeah.
Oh
So yeah, I
wow.
don't know, but it's hard because I usually love like it's so I cannot describe a better high than like finding a new location, researching it, getting like where it is, planning your trip there. Like people talk about a runner's high. To me, like that is like I get so excited when I go to visit like a new place, and I've like learned a lot of like the context to it. And I really I could say I'm not a huge history buff, but I just love a good story. And so
Yeah.
the combination of the two is just, oh, it's so, so fun.
There's something just so great about abandoned places. I know that a lot of
Yeah,
cities like want to get rid of abandoned places and clean them up, but I
totally.
love it when they're preserved because it's just like history, even though it's decaying, it's still just like
Yeah,
history right in front of you and you can explore it. But yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
something so
And there's a whole
mystical.
fascination to it. Photography, videography. I mean, like, we love abandoned places.
Yeah. So before I let you go, I just want to know if you have like a favorite spooky story or ghost story or anything like historic or like anything spooky that has happened to you that you want to share before we go.
Um, so again, I'm not quite sure. I can't tell if this is I have a cousin who's a nurse who's kind of talked me out of like the reality of this. So in DC there's again urban legends. We have a couple of those. There's this famous urban legend called the Bunny Man Bridge. And I think even like a terrible movie someone said was being made off of it. And they're apparently like back in like the 1800s, there were these two prisoners. They escaped from the local jail in Virginia, and one of them killed the other one and hung his body off of this bridge in Morton, Virginia. And the man disappeared into the woods. They found the body of the other cellmate, or what these guys who escaped. And over the years, they started finding rabbit carcasses in around this bridge. And so just so many urban legends have come up for it. Eventually, over the years, started getting developed. I mean, this is about a 20-minute drive from DC, so it just became a more popular area. And they were finding these bunnies, like literally bottles of bunnies, and they were thinking someone in the woods might be eating them, like killing them and eating them. And then, so like kind of this legend of the Bunny Man Bridge, just because they thought the prisoner just might be in the woods eating rabbits. And then years and years later, a development is coming to the area. There's a bunch of houses haven't been sold yet, but they're being built right around this bridge. And they had a police car wandering around the bridge and saw a man in a bunny outfit hacking at one of the new like condos that was being developed. And the guy shouted like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And the man turned, threw a hatchet at him, didn't hit him luckily, but threw a hatchet at him and then ran into the woods. And so just even added more to this bunny man story of like literally now there's like an adult man in this full rabbit outfit. And then so now over the years, like teens will go to the Bunny Man Bridge, and like on Halloween they always have a cop car there. Even my cousins growing up, like they went there and like their car stalled right around midnight, and they were just
Ooh.
freaking out and just like again like sometimes it's again like almost like chicken and the egg, like weird, maybe a weird story happens, so then it just attracts more weird stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and like I think like someone like a teen either killed themselves or was murdered right around there, kind of around Halloween over the years. So all of this aside, like 2 years ago, I was like, I've never actually been to the Bunny Man Bridge. It was fall, it was a beautiful day. I'll drive there. And it's still kind of in an isolated area. Like there's like kind of these like giant houses with huge yards. So like it still feels very woodsy. And the bridge itself is at the bottom of a hill. So I started on the opposite side of the hill, driving up the hill, and it's trees all around, middle of nowhere. There's no sidewalks. You can see kind of in the distance behind a lot of trees, like a one house and then another house. And I was like, my Google Maps was like, oh, you're like, you know, 10 seconds away from the bridge. And right as I got to the top of the hill, so I couldn't even see the bridge yet, there was this old woman standing literally right in the middle of the road, completely dressed in black. And she almost had like a, have you seen Emperor's New Groove? The
Yeah.
blue conference. Yzma, who has like the black goggles when she's like going into like, her, whatever her evil plan is. Kind of like an Yzma like character, like just this old woman, huge black, like almost like feathered black outfit, blonde, white hair, and then these like black goggles on, and just like standing there, like very solidly in the middle of the road. And like it was so like there's no sidewalks, there's no one else there. I drove up the road, and I was just like, what? I like almost hit her just because like I wasn't expecting anyone. Like we're in the middle of like the woods basically, and I like start to drive down the car, and like she slowly turns her head. She's like this like long nose, and just like looks at me, and I'm like, what? Like at that point, then I hit the bridge. Like the bridge is not like hit it, but like I got to the bridge, and I was like less concerned with the bridge. I'm like, who the heck is that woman? So I like go under the bridge, turn around, and maybe it was like 60 seconds to like drive back around, drive up the hill. By the time I got back up the hill, the woman was gone.
What?
There's no sidewalks. Like she must have like run into, and so like I was like, what is going, like who was that? And she had like it was definitely like it wasn't just like even like a woman crossing the road. Like she was firmly planted between the two, like of the two-sided road, like firmly planted, standing right in the middle, almost like she was like waiting for something. And so strange. Yeah. And so she's gone. And so my cousins live not too far. I was going to their house. I was like, I think I saw a ghost or something. Like, what the heck? And it was right by the Bunny Man Bridge. Like, this is so weird. My cousin's like, you should have called the cops. Like, that's probably some woman who's just like lost and like, you know, like wandered away from one of these houses. And I'm like, there's no path. She literally would have had to like climb through all this like Russell to get to there. So anyways, if that's my ghost story, I'll stick to it.
What time of day was this?
It was like 11 a.m. It was like broad daylight.
Weird. That's creepy.
Yeah.
I like how like
so
realistic
strange,
your cousin was though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's a nurse, very practical. Yeah, she's like, yeah, I should have called the cops. It's probably some woman who's just like lost in the woods. And I'm like, she did not look lost. She looked totally content to like stand on that top of that hill.
That's creepy. I like it.
Thanks.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been really, really awesome talking to you. You have so many cool stories.
What an honor.
Are there any social media or blogs or YouTube or anything that you want to share that people can visit you at?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm Laughlaner, Laslaneure. So weird. Well, find Laughlaner or Ghostly Archive on TikTok. Crystal, it's been such an honor. This was so fun for me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. Please visit Rosie at her socials. I have everything linked in the podcast description. Bye.